Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki. Let's get started.
Баллистической ракетой «Сармат». Планируется, что уже в конце года первый такой комплекс.
Will Russia use nuclear weapons against Ukraine? Is the world headed for a nuclear war? These questions are being asked over and over again, and for good reason. The risk of a nuclear war is the highest in 60 years. The last time the world came this close to a war was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Now we are in 2022. Russia is waging a war in Europe, and its president Vladimir Putin is threatening to deploy nuclear missiles. Russia claims to have the biggest nuclear missiles, called the Satan. The US is warning of severe consequences, but not really spelling out what these consequences might be. And this is a very dangerous situation. Our world has seen only 2 nuclear attacks. When America hit 2 Japanese cities in 1945, the US was the only nuclear power then. Today, there are more than 8, and more in the making. Will a Russian strike trigger a full-blown nuclear war? Is Putin serious about the nuclear threat, or is he just bluffing? What are the possible scenarios and the potential targets? On Gravitas tonight, we will discuss. That's what the war has done to Ukraine. Almost 4 months now and counting. Russia has been dropping bombs, and it's not done yet. Vladimir Putin is chasing a decisive victory, and for that he's ready to push the nuclear button. The Russian president says they're deploying nuclear missiles. Listen to this.
Our armed forces now have the unrivaled S-500 air and missile defense systems. Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missiles have been successfully tested. We're planning for the first such complex will be deployed by the end of the year.
Nuclear missiles, the deadliest weapons in Putin's armor. He's threatening to use them. Listen to what he said last week, and I'm quoting. This is from the Russian president. We aren't threatening anyone, but everyone should be aware of what we have and what we will use, if required, to protect our sovereignty. Vladimir Putin was talking about nuclear missiles. He wants to deploy them by the end of this year, 2022. How serious is this threat? And where can Russia use these nukes? On Gravitas tonight, that's what we'll discuss. First, let's show you the weapon that Putin is talking about. This is it. It's called the Sarmat. It's also called the Satan. Now, this is an ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile. What's an ICBM? It's basically a large missile usually designed to deliver nuclear warheads. It has a minimum range of 5,000 kilometers. That's the criterion to define the ICBM. The Sarmat is the largest ICBM anyone has bothered to build. Putin has made some very big claims about this weapon. He says it can hit, quote unquote, any target on Earth. any target. It travels at speeds of more than 25,000 kilometers per hour, and it can carry more than 10 warheads. Of course, these are Russia's claims. It's difficult to verify the true capabilities of this weapon. But Putin wants the West to fear Russia's nuclear arsenal. The Russian president is sending a pointed message. Do not stand in Russia's way. That's what he's saying.
And why should we be silent? We will respond accordingly. As soon as we answer, they cling to it and say that Russia is threatening. We do not threaten anything, but everyone should know that we have nuclear weapons and that we will use them if necessary to protect our sovereignty. These are obvious things.
If you threaten us, we will use the nukes. Vladimir Putin is speaking in very clear terms. And these may not be empty threats. In February, Putin had summoned his military chiefs. He ordered them to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. This was an escalation. The high alert means an increased state of readiness. So if Putin gives the orders, Russian forces will be able to launch a nuclear weapon quickly. What kind of nukes can Russia fire immediately? Just one weapon, the long-range ballistic missiles. Russia can fire them from land and from submarines. But there is a second option too. And that's called tactical nuclear weapons. Russia could use those. These are missiles with a shorter range. These are the kind of weapons that can be used in Ukraine. Russia has about a dozen central nuclear storage facilities. They're called Object S sites. Thousands of nuclear warheads and hydrogen bombs are stored there. One of these sites is Belgorod 22. It's just 40 kilometers from the Ukraine border. It is believed that Russia stores these tactical nuclear missiles in this facility, close to the Ukrainian border. Now, what happens if Putin decides to launch one? This, of course, is a hypothetical situation, but this is how it's expected to play out. First, Russian forces go to the storage site. They retrieve the weapon. They bring it back to a military base. The missile is made combat ready. The warhead is mounted on the missile, and then it is loaded on a plane. Russian fighter jets could end up firing these nukes into Ukraine. We hope it doesn't happen, but we cannot be sure. Analysts say the threat of a Russian nuclear strike is real. In the month of March, Moscow had asserted its right to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and now we are in June, and Russia is still talking about the nuclear option. So what are the potential targets? 4 scenarios are being talked about. Number 1 is a bomb being detonated over the Black Sea. This will avoid any human casualties, but at the same time, it will send a message to the West. That's scenario number 1. Number 2, a decapitation strike on the Ukrainian leadership, meaning an attack on President Volodymyr Zelensky and his advisors. The Ukrainians have been raising these fears from day one. Scenario number 3, a strike on a Ukrainian military asset. This could be a military base or a supply depot. And option number 4, a strike on a Ukrainian city. And I don't need to tell you how horrific this would be. In fact, all these scenarios spell horror. Any nuclear attack on Ukraine or its people would be a crime against humanity, and Russia may not be able to survive its consequences. Knowing all of this, will Vladimir Putin still follow through on his threats? Is this just brinkmanship, or is he serious about using a nuclear weapon? Logic says he won't, but history is proof that logic tends to not inform such decisions, and that ignoring any threat from Vladimir Putin is unwise. All that saber-rattling has also spooked the world economy. Every day it's the same headline. Your fuel is more expensive, your favorite food has gone missing from the shelves, your domestic currency is losing value. Tonight, let's focus on the last one, your currency. Chances are it has lost value in the last few months. Take the Japanese yen, for example. It's down 18% compared to the US dollar this year. $1 now equals 136 yen. And this is a 24-year low. Compare that to February when Russia invaded. $1 was equal to 115 yen. You see the difference? Same story in South Korea. Their currency is called the won. In February, $1 was trading at 1,200 won. Today, it has reached 1,300. The Philippine currency also crashed today. $1 now equals more than 54 Philippine pesos. It's the lowest value in 17 years. No currency has been spared in this crash. The Indian rupee, we've been telling you, is down. The Chinese yuan is down. The euro is down. But guess which currency is not down? The Russian ruble. Let me show you some numbers. On the day of the invasion, $1 equaled 85 rubles. Then came the sanctions, the trade embargoes, the boycotts. All of it was supposed to break the Russian economy. Do you remember what Joe Biden said back in the month of March? He said the ruble is now rubble. Well, that rubble is now the best performing currency in the world. It is up 35% this year. $1 now equals 53 rubles. The question is how? How did this happen? The sanctions were supposed to make the ruble worthless. So why is it setting new records? Because of three reasons. Number one, Russia's capital control measures. The central bank has designed policies to keep money inside Russia. I'll give you an example. Imagine you run a company in Russia. You have business operations outside the country as well. Every year you earn $100 million. According to new laws, 80% of that revenue will be converted into rubles. In this example, $80 million. Such measures have increased the demand for rubles. It kept capital from fleeing Russia. Reason number two, gas payments in rubles. European companies used to pay Russia in euros. After the invasion, Russia changed that policy. They demanded payments in rubles. So once again, demand for the Russian currency has gone up. Reason number three, import controls. If you import more goods, you need more dollars. But Russia has done the opposite. They cut down on foreign imports. And the result is this. They've needed fewer dollars in the last few months. So the strengthening ruble is not really an organic market reaction. It has been designed by the Russian government. The problem is they may have overdone it. According to market experts, the dollar should be around 70 to 80 rubles. Instead, it's trading at 53, which means Russian exports are less competitive, which includes gas, oil, fertilizers, food grains. All of it costs more in foreign markets. So the strong showing by the ruble is a 50-50 result, really. Yes, it has kept the exchange rate stable, but every other indicator is looking bad in Russia. Inflation, it's at 17%. GDP is expected to fall 7.8%. Unemployment is expected to hit 9%, and these shock waves are not limited to Russia, really. In Britain, inflation has topped 9.1%. This is the highest level in almost 40 years, 4-0, the highest in 4 decades. The Bank of England fears the worst is yet to come. They're predicting 11% inflation by the end of 2022. And workers are already in rebellion. On Tuesday, rail workers struck work. We told you about this. Rumor is teachers are planning something similar now. All of them are asking for inflation relief, maybe a wage hike or a tax cut. But Boris Johnson has refused to give in. His government fears a repeat of the 1970s. Back then, the government increased wages to cope with inflation, to give people some relief. But that move was counterproductive. Britain ended up descending into an inflation spiral. And at the end of that spiral, you will probably find Sri Lanka. Their economy has completely collapsed. The Prime Minister said as much in Parliament. The economy has collapsed, he said. There is no money to buy fuel, to import food, or to repay their debt. Sri Lanka's state-owned petroleum company is $700 million in debt. Nobody is lending to them anymore. Even the credit lines from India and China are almost exhausted, which means fuel imports could soon stop altogether. Now, the talks with the IMF are already happening, but they will take time. The debt restructuring talks will only be concluded by the end of July. That's more than a month. What can Sri Lanka do until then? The Prime Minister is betting on a donor conference. He has invited India, China and Japan. With their help, Sri Lanka can remain afloat. And once the IMF bailout comes, they can begin their recovery, hopefully. But that plan hinges on the world economy. If there is a recession next year, recovery is going to be harder for Sri Lanka than the others. Investors will stay away. Trade will slow down. So Sri Lanka has a small window to stabilize itself. If not, the recovery could coincide with a global recession, and that won't look good. Of course, India too is affected by all of these problems. Rising prices, falling currency, shortages. But economics is not India's only worry. Its geography is also a problem. Some of India's northern neighbours are a problematic lot, like Pakistan, Afghanistan and China. The first two are a political problem, Pakistan and Afghanistan. They present no economic challenge to India. China, on the other hand, does. Even today, China is India's second biggest trading partner. Total trade is almost $129 billion. And the number itself is not surprising. We're talking about two of the biggest economies in the world, also two neighbours. So naturally, their bilateral trade is high. Having said that, this is not good news for India. And I'll give you 3 reasons why. Number 1, the trade is heavily set in China's favor. Let me again go back to numbers. These are from the first quarter of 2022. Chinese exports to India are up 45%. It was 4.8 trillion rupees last year. This year, it's 7 trillion rupees. What about Indian exports to China? Up 0.6%. There is simply no comparison. 45% for China, less than 1% for India. What's even worse is the trajectory. In 2021, Chinese exports had increased just 4.5%. The year before, in 2020, in fact, they actually dropped 6.2%. Now, do you see the problem here? Since 2020, India has imported more and more from China. The trade deficit is almost $73 billion. Reason number 2, the political atmosphere. Think back to the Galwan Valley clashes in 2020. After that, India got tough on Chinese businesses. We told you about all of those moves. Mobile apps were banned, tech companies were investigated, but bilateral trade continues. As we speak, China has deployed thousands of soldiers in Ladakh. They claim sovereignty over Indian land, yet India buys from that same China. Compare that to India's Pakistan policy. Trade and terror cannot go hand in hand, we say. That is India's position. And frankly, it's the right position. Conflicts cannot be ignored for business. So why is it different for China? How do border disputes and trade go hand in hand with China? If China can encroach into Indian territory, if China can attack Indian soldiers, the least India can do is not give them $73 billion on a platter. I know it's a political argument, but in this case, it makes economic sense. And that's reason number 3. What is the biggest lesson we've learned in the last 2 years? Supply chains define our lives. First, the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine. Both crises have made us realize the importance of diverse supply chains. Our ketchup, our gasoline, our mobile phones, everything is dependent on them. And China was the biggest failure on this front. When China locked down, factories shut down all over the world. There were no semiconductors, no plastic, no gadgets. Chinese supply chains proved to be the most vulnerable. And what does India do? Import more commodities from that same China. It's like betting on the losing horse. India needs to diversify its purchases, try to source raw material from elsewhere because China is simply not reliable. Their zero-COVID strategy could choke India's economic recovery, and I'll tell you how. Most of India's imports in the first quarter were raw materials, like minerals, chemicals, fertilizers, plastic, electronic parts, which means India's economic recovery is underway. All these materials are used by factories. They're not used by consumers. So the Indian industrial comeback is very much on. Now imagine there's a second zero-COVID lockdown in China. This trade is going to be disrupted. These raw materials would not be available anymore. Do you see the problem now? India cannot depend on Chinese goods for its economic recovery. It needs more options, especially in these challenging times. The Indian economy is not insulated from the global economic crisis. Wholesale inflation is at a multi-decade high in India. Consumer inflation is expected to top 9% later this year, 9%. And to give you some context, India's average inflation in the last decade was just 6%. Now we're looking at 9%. Plus, the rupee is weakening every day. It has already hit a historic low against the dollar. How is the government planning to tackle all of this? The Reserve Bank of India has already hiked interest rates twice. Yet inflation is not cooling down, so now the government is stepping in. Reports say oil companies have been asked to buy cheaper Russian oil. You see, Russian crude is almost $30 cheaper. It costs $30 less than oil from other sources per barrel, $30. So buying Russian oil is a no-brainer for India. It could help cushion the impact of inflation. Again, I have more numbers. In February, India was buying 30,000 barrels per day from Russia. Now we're buying more than 1 million barrels a day. That's almost 25 times more oil since the war began. And why not? Every country is looking after its own interest. So why not India? But that principle must apply to all trade. If oil purchases can be diversified, so can mineral purchases or semiconductor purchases. What is needed is targeted investment and policies. I'll end with an example. 7 out of 10 toys sold in India are imported from China. 7 out of 10. We're not talking about sophisticated technology. We're talking about basic toys. India can make equally good ones. But for that, it must build up its own industries and stop the buying spree from China. For the moment, we're turning to Afghanistan. It's reeling in the aftermath of a massive earthquake, magnitude 5.9 on the Richter scale. The death toll is very high. At least 1,000 people are said to have died, more than 600 injured. This is one of the worst tragedies that Afghanistan has witnessed in recent times. Scores of houses have been reduced to rubble, countless buildings destroyed. The Taliban has launched a relief operation, but it's struggling because of lack of resources. Here's a report.
This is Paktika, one of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. On Tuesday night, it was hit by a 5.9 magnitude quake. This is what it left behind: a trail of damaged buildings, destroyed structures, and ruined houses. More than 1,000 people have died, over 600 have been injured. The toll is expected to rise as rescuers dig through collapsed dwellings. The earthquake struck at 1:30 a.m. local time. This is when most people were at home, asleep.
It was midnight when the earthquake struck. The kids and I screamed. One of our rooms was destroyed. Our neighbor screamed, and we saw everyone's rooms.
It was about midnight when the quake struck. It destroyed the houses of our neighbors. When we arrived, there were many dead and wounded. They sent us to the hospital. I also saw many dead bodies.
Most of the houses have been reduced to rubble. The Taliban have launched a relief operation, but with limited resources, lack of disaster relief staff, and a handful of airworthy planes, there's only so much they can do. In some places, locals could be seen loading victims into helicopters. In others, ramshackle vehicles have been turned into ambulances. And these visuals are only from areas accessible by road and air. There is no word on what's going down in remote mountain villages. It will take slightly longer for the information to come out. Reports say people are not sure about the well-being of their relatives. Phones are not working. The towers have been destroyed. All they can do is wait for an official confirmation.
Based on the orders of the Prime Minister, it has been decided that over 100,000 will be given to victims' families and 50,000 cash will be given to families with injured as urgent help.
Afghanistan is located in a tectonically active region. It sits on a number of fault lines. This makes the country prone to powerful tremors. In the last 10 years, 7,000 Afghans have been killed in earthquakes. There are an average of 560 deaths a year from quakes, and over 4 earthquakes have been reported this year itself. The timing of the latest one couldn't have been worse. Afghanistan is struggling with multiple crises. More than 20 million people are experiencing acute hunger. Foreign reserves worth $7 billion are all but frozen. International funding is cut off. At a time like this, mounting a rescue operation could prove to be a major test for the Taliban. They face international sanctions. Their record on human rights is abysmal. So any serious assistance will be hard to come by. As of now, India and Pakistan are the only 2 countries that are promised help.
Pakistan, being its neighbor, Afghanistan's neighbor, has said that they're trying to work out, given the crippling economic conditions that Afghanistan is facing because of the sanctions. The Afghan authorities, those involved in disaster relief, have called out on non-governmental organizations and rather governmental organizations as well to step up and help the people of Afghanistan in this time of need, given that the casualty figure is expected to rise. Anas Malik in Islamabad, Pakistan for WION World is One.
They say you should never lie to 2 people, your doctor and your lawyer. One can save your life, the other can save your freedom. Both relationships are built on the same thing: trust. You're trusting the doctor with your life, you're trusting the medicine they prescribe. But do we trust the middlemen? I'm talking about big pharma. They are the big grey area in medical science. The doctors trust them, we trust them, because the assumption is that their medicines will work. that everything was done by the book. Turns out that's not always the case. I'm sure you've heard about Biocon. It's one of the biggest pharma companies in India. They sell drugs in over 120 countries. The founder is arguably more famous, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, one of the first female entrepreneurs in India. Today, her company is in deep trouble. India's top investigation agency, the CBI, has arrested Biocon's associate vice president. It has also named a few other top company executives. The charges? Bribery. Biocon allegedly tried to bribe India's top drug regulator. It is called the CDSCO, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, sort of like India's FDA. Every medicine must be cleared by this body. It examines clinical trial data. It scrutinizes licenses. And only after that will a medicine be allowed to hit the market. Now, this process takes time. Sometimes it can drag on for years. And as they say, time is money. So Biocon is said to have tried to speed things up. They had a new product in the pipeline, insulin aspart. Normally, it would go through multiple trials, phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. But Biocon apparently wanted to cut corners. The charge is that they sought regulatory approval without doing phase 3 trials. And guess what? They got it. Because Biocon reportedly bribed a top official at the regulatory body. He was paid 4 lakh rupees. That's around $5,000 US. The CBI have arrested this top official as well. And the timing is interesting. On May 18th, Biocon's insulin got a waiver for phase 3, which means a rollout was due any time. This insulin could have hit the Indian markets any day. If the charges stand, just imagine the risk. India is home to 100 million diabetics. They belong to different age groups. They have different medical histories. Who knows how this insulin would have impacted them? And this is precisely why we have regulators and trials, to slow down profit-hungry pharma companies, to protect patients. But in this case, all of them seem to have failed. Biocon, on their part, have denied all the charges. The company says they strictly follow a strong code of conduct, but investors are not buying it. Biocon shares dropped 4% in today's trade. But then again, let's face it, shares recover. Public trust may not. While the charges are yet to be proven, this controversy has done irreparable damage to India's pharma industry. First, some basic facts. Big pharma is all about trust. If people trust your brand, they will promote you. If not, they will dump you in a minute. It's a cutthroat world, and India was betting big on this world. India's pharma industry is the 3rd largest by volume, 14th largest by valuation. It is growing at almost 11% per year. Take any generic drug, chances are an Indian company produces it. 40% of all generic medicines in the US are supplied by India. Same with vaccines. 60% of all vaccines in the world are made in India. Like Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, India is the pharmacy of the world. And that is a lot of power. And with great power comes great responsibility. In this case, the responsibility to protect lives. And controversies like these put a question mark on how well India is fulfilling that responsibility. Again, if the charges are proven, and I keep repeating that, if the charges are proven, Biocon must take the blame for what happened. But so should the authorities. Reports say India's drug regulator is understaffed. There are few resources, no oversight, and a lot of corruption. It's the perfect recipe for disaster. And don't get me wrong, being understaffed is not an excuse for taking bribes, but even so, the regulator needs an overhaul. And let me tell you why. The US FDA has a budget of $6 billion. What about the Indian regulator? In 2020, they got $223 million to strengthen the regulatory system. $6 billion versus $223 million. Do you know why the US spends so much? Because they are the biggest drug market in the world, and India is among the biggest drug makers, which means India too must increase its spending. If you want to capitalize on any industry, you must do the groundwork. I'm talking about licenses, regulators, quality checks. These are equally important to any industry. And by the way, India's big pharma has messed up before. Do you remember the Ranbaxy saga? Whistleblowers accused the company of falsifying medical data. They admitted to wrongdoing, and later the company was sold to a Japanese pharma giant. India survived that mistake. Will it survive this one? Because like I said, in this business, trust is everything. There's a reason why people buy German cars or Swiss watches. They have built consumer trust over many decades. Not by bribing regulators, but by making safe and proven products. Lesson for Indian pharma: profits and products are easily made. Do you know what's not? Goodwill. Speaking of which, the Saudi Crown Prince is trying to reinforce his goodwill, redeem his image. He's trying to mend ties with Riyadh's neighbours. Neighbours that had grown apart in the recent years, three of them in particular, Egypt, Jordan and Turkey. All three have outstanding issues with Riyadh. MBS is trying to settle them. In the last 3 days, he has visited all three countries and tried to woo their leaders, bridge the gaps. As I speak, he's in Turkey holding talks with President Erdogan. Our next report tells you more about it.
He is the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, an elusive and impulsive crown prince known for his grandiose reform plans. In the last 4 years, Mohammed bin Salman's ambitions had put him at odds with West Asia. They had damaged the kingdom's ties with its neighbours. Jordan blamed the crown prince for a failed coup plot in Amman. A dispute over territorial waters created fissures between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi strained Riyadh's ties with Ankara. 4 years on, MBS is trying to let bygones be bygones. He has embarked on a 3-country tour. A tour aimed at restoring Saudi's regional supremacy. The timing is crucial. This tour comes right before Joe Biden's visit to Riyadh. So what MBS is essentially trying to do is demonstrate to Biden that he's far from isolated and that Saudi Arabia remains a key player in the region. The tour started with Egypt, the land of pyramids. MBS went there on Monday, met Egyptian President El-Sisi, signed 14 pacts worth $7 billion and discussed solutions to the prevailing territorial tensions. The next stop was Jordan, the custodian of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In 2020, Saudi Arabia's growing closeness to Israel had unnerved Jordan about its hold on the mosque. Amman feared the normalization of ties could alter the status quo. Then in 2021, reports emerged that Jordan's Prince Hamza had sought help from Riyadh in toppling his brother. Both issues had led to turbulence in bilateral ties. On Tuesday, MBS tried to settle the differences by offering economic assistance to Amman and $3 billion in investment projects. On the last leg of his tour, the Crown Prince has landed in Turkey, the first visit since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. Khashoggi was a fierce Saudi critic murdered in the kingdom's consulate in Turkey. The killing led to a bitter rift. The Crown Prince will try to heal it on this visit. And this is the broader theme of his tour, Bridging Divides. The Saudi Crown Prince wants to redeem his image. He wants to mend ties with Turkey and bury the Khashoggi story. What is in it for Erdogan? Money. Turkey's economy is in shambles. They need financial support. That's priority number one as Erdogan launches his election campaign. Presidential polls in Turkey will be held in June 2023. So both leaders have buried the hatchet. It's true what they say. There are no permanent friends or enemies in geopolitics, only interests.
Let's talk about China now. The Communist Party's latest source of threat, Tesla cars. They fear Tesla could be spying for America, so they're banning these cars from some places. Next month, an important meeting is coming up. The Communist Party will have its annual summer retreat. Chinese leaders will gather in a coastal district called Beidehi. This is an annual summit. The top Chinese leadership meets behind closed doors. They discuss policy ideas. They talk about future plans. And ahead of this event, Tesla cars have been banned from this coastal district. They cannot enter the district for the next 2 months. The ban starts from the 1st of July. How does China explain this ban? As always, it does not. Local police in Beidehi say the decision was based on quote-unquote national affairs. What does that even mean? And these bans are not new, by the way. Earlier, a similar ban was imposed in Chengdu. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently paid a visit to that city, and that's when Tesla cars were asked to leave certain areas. Again, those restrictions were temporary. But there are places in China where Tesla cars are permanently banned, like Chinese military complexes. Last year, the Chinese military had banned Tesla, so these cars cannot enter any PLA facility. Some state employees are also barred from using a Tesla. The reason they cite is national security. So the question is, can a Tesla be a security threat? Well, technically, yes. But then why just Tesla? This applies to all modern vehicles. They're more than just cars. They're smart machines. They come with a lot of sensors. They can detect road lanes, even nearby cars. A Tesla also comes with 8 cameras. The drivers can use them to look around. They can see what's happening near the car. And China does not like the idea of it. It fears that Tesla can be turned into a spying tool. That the cameras on this car can watch Communist Party members. They can take photos and videos and send them to servers in America. Elon Musk has rejected this charge. He says Tesla cannot be used for spying and that car cameras do not work outside North America. But China is not convinced. And what an interesting pivot. In 2019, China rolled out the red carpet for the same Tesla. It now calls Tesla a national security threat because it's a car with cameras. And it's ironic because China is the champion of spying with cameras. China has millions of cameras to monitor these cars and the people inside them, and all kinds of cars. We've told you why China is called a surveillance state. It has the biggest domestic surveillance system in the world, and Beijing keeps upgrading the system all the time. Now, a new report has thrown up new details about Beijing's surveillance powers, about its scale and sophistication. China has half of the world's CCTVs. That's what the report says. The world has close to 1 billion surveillance cameras. China is believed to have half of them, 500 million cameras. 500 million. What do you do with so many cameras? You spy. Look at the Chinese province of Fujian. Reports say Fujian has about 7,000 camera feeds. They store photos of 2,000 faces every day. The local police keeps this data. They store it for 6 months. So at any given time, the police in Fujian has access to over 2.5 billion faces. What does China do with this data? They use it to build profiles of people. What they wear, where they live, where they go, how they commute, and who they meet frequently. Basically, a complete profile of an individual. Recent upgrades have added more capabilities to China's surveillance. Phone trackers are now believed to be everywhere in China. Using these, Chinese authorities can track the movements of any citizen. And that's not all. Authorities in Guangdong are deploying audio capturing equipment. They record clips of what people are saying. The next step, they say, is analyzing what people say. The police is also collecting the DNA and iris scans of citizens. 23 out of 31 provinces and regions of China already have such databases, DNA and iris bases. What will China do with all of this data? The Chinese state basically wants to know everything about its citizens, what they're up to at any given point in time. The idea is to identify, track, and eventually crack down on all potential dissenters, even if they are in a Tesla car. Well, all that data in the world, all the technology, all the surveillance, yet China cannot use it for something as basic as issuing timely flood warnings. Because the country is experiencing what's being called the worst flood in decades. Several provinces are struggling to stay afloat. People are stranded in flooded high-rises and drowning cars. Our next report shows you the chaos that is China today.
They say when it rains, it pours. Recognize this place? This is China. A China that's inundated. The country is battling the worst flood in decades. A red alert has been issued in several provinces. Villages and cities are struggling to stay afloat. Roads have collapsed. And so have houses. This is Guangdong, China's most populous province. Also the second most populous country division in the world. Guangdong is China's manufacturing hub, home to the likes of Huawei and Tencent. On a sunny day, you would see construction sites everywhere. Currently, floodwaters are sweeping everything in sight. Look at this fire engine. Schools have been closed, businesses have been closed. At least 200,000 people have been evacuated. And the flood warning has been raised to the highest level. Guangdong has reported damages upwards of $250 million. In the Jiangxi province, there's knee-deep water everywhere. People living in high-rises are climbing down balconies. Homes of some 500,000 people have been damaged in this province alone. More than 43,000 hectares of crops have been destroyed. Jiangxi is reporting damages upwards of $70 million. In neighbouring Guangxi, people are being packed into rubber dinghies and ferried to higher lands. In Fujian, a driver was found stranded in a drowning car. And this is the province of Zhejiang. We don't know how many people have died in these floods, or how many have been injured. China simply won't tell. A Global Times report says that a number of rescue workers died when they transferred locals to safe areas. But the Chinese mouthpiece was careful to not reveal that number. Floods are not uncommon in China, especially during the summer months. But this year it's different. It's the worst flood in decades. The prophecy is scarier. Analysts say that the flooding will continue for at least 10 days. It will affect domestic production and push up inflation. The story does not end here. While it's flooding in southern China, the north is battling extreme heat. Temperatures have crossed 40 degrees Celsius, be it in the province of Hebei, Shandong or Henan. At least 12 provinces are battling heat waves. It's an extreme situation of extreme weather. China maintains it's all under control. Except it doesn't quite look like it.
Let's talk about something a little more cheerful, like freebies. Who does not like them? Do you know who gets the most number of freebies? Influencers. The influencer economy is driven by promotion of free products, from clothes to bags to skincare products, vacations, staycations, front row seats at fashion shows, first-class flight tickets, fitness equipment. Influencers get everything for free. And if that's not enough, they also get paid for promoting these freebies, for posting about them, vouching for them. How much do they earn? Anything between $10,000 to $10,000 per post. $10 to $10,000. Now, India has pressed brake on this free ride. India has decided to tax influencers for freebies. They will have to pay a 10% TDS. This is part of a new income tax rule. And it also applies to doctors, those who receive free medical products from pharma companies. But that's a story for another day. Today we'll focus on influencers. First things first, what's TDS? Tax deduction at source. Influencers will be expected to pay tax for anything they receive and retain for free. And I mean anything. A free trip to Paris, a handbag, a pair of sneakers, a skincare product, a garment, a mobile phone, a gourmet sauce. It doesn't matter. If it's for free, you will be taxed. And the move aims to kill two birds with a stone. One, it expands India's tax net, and two, it promotes accountability. Let's start with the money. And there's a lot of it in this industry. The creator economy is worth around $13 billion. By the end of 2022, it is estimated to be worth over $16 billion. In India alone, the influencer market is worth $120 million. This growth is being catalyzed by the digital pivot. Businesses today have adopted a new marketing strategy. It's called social first, which basically means if you want a product to be marketed well, do it on social media first. Influencers have thousands, even millions of followers on social media. Brands prefer them for marketing over a movie star. And it makes sense, A, because influencers charge relatively less, and B, they prove to be more effective salespeople. One research found that 3% consumers would consider buying a product if it is promoted by a celebrity, but 60% would be open to buying it if it is promoted by an influencer. Look at the gap, 3 versus 60. So brands go for influencers. But what kind of products are these influencers promoting? This brings us to point number 2, accountability. Where is that? And like it or not, you and I are all part of this influencer industry where followers are monetized. Instagram feeds have turned into billboards. Have you noticed just how many products influencers promote? One day, they're recommending a certain brand. The very next day, they're vouching for another one. Honest reviews have been replaced by paid promotions for freebies. And there's zero accountability. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Fire Festival? It was supposed to be a music festival in the Bahamas. It was promoted as the biggest event of the decade. And promoting this festival were some of the biggest Instagram influencers. They were paid thousands of dollars each to promote the Fire Festival. And people believed them, so they bought tickets. Many paid as much as $12,000. This was in the year 2017. You know what happened next? The Fire Festival never took place. Read up about it. It's amusing to say the least. The influencer economy has made lies and deception lucrative. And while something like the scale of the Fire Festival has not been repeated yet, to the best of our knowledge, lying about the effectiveness of certain products, a health drink or a skincare product, is quite common these days. At least 200 million people around the world call themselves influencers. It's a population almost the size of Pakistan. Every day, these influencers are unboxing new products, making stories or reels about them, telling you which phone you should buy next or which restaurant serves the best pasta in town. It's hard to say what's genuine and what's not, what's paid and what's not. But one thing's for sure, with each post, with each story, your choices are being influenced. What you buy, what you wear, what you eat, even where and how you travel, all these decisions are being influenced. And someone else is making money off it. Now, India wants to change this. It wants to tax social media influencers. It may help bring accountability, because when freebies are no longer free, content creators will rethink accepting and promoting every box that comes their way. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Будемо мати ключі.